Hi, welcome to First Year Microeconomics. In this second set of videos, we're going to be looking at a fundamental economic concept, the idea of trade. To start that, in this presentation we're going to ask a simple question. What is trade? Here is a simple definition. Trade is any exchange for money, for other goods, which we call barter, or for satisfaction. Okay, what does this mean? Trade for money is something pretty much every one of us does every day. So let's say you want some bread for lunch. You go to a store, you choose which loaf of bread you want to buy. And in exchange for that loaf of bread, you hand over some money. So you exchange your money for the goods that you want to buy. But sometimes we exchange goods and services directly for other goods and services without actually using money. We refer to this sort of trade as barter trade. Let's give an example. Suppose you share a house. It's your turn to do the cooking for the evening. It's your housemate's turn to wash the dirty dishes. But suppose that you would actually prefer to wash the dirty dishes rather than to cook, and your housemate would actually prefer to do the cooking rather than to wash the dirty dishes. Well, you can exchange tasks. You can trade. You're trading one task for another task, and that's a form of barter. Trade sometimes looks like a one-way deal. For example, you might help out at a women's shelter, donate some funds to World Vision, or you might volunteer for Clean Up Australia Day. We can still think of these activities as being trade. You're giving up your time, your effort, and sometimes your money, and in return you're getting the satisfaction of knowing that you've helped others and you've done the right thing. Economics can and does study these sorts of trade. Now, there's a myth that economics assumes people are all greedy and that it cannot analyse voluntary transactions. It is a myth. Economics does not assume people are greedy. Economics assumes people maximise their satisfaction or their happiness. And you can maximise your satisfaction and happiness by helping others. In fact, life would be pretty miserable if you didn't do that sometimes. Now, in this course, we're going to be focusing on the first two sorts of trade. Trade for money, or trade in exchange for other goods or services, barter transactions. But don't forget that economics can and does consider charitable actions and that they're not outside the scope of economics. The key principle, however, is that trade is voluntary. In other words, there's no coercion. You can always say no. Nobody will force you to do a transaction. We can think of this as a no guns rule. It means that when you make an exchange, when you hand over your money in exchange for the goods or services, or when you exchange one set of goods and services for another set of goods and services, then you do so of your own free will. Now, that's different from saying you may not have regrets later on. We've all been in that situation. What it means is that when you do the exchange, when you make the trade, there's no force involved. You choose to do so. Voluntary trade has an important implication. As noted here by Milton Friedman, a famous economist from the University of Chicago. If trade is voluntary, then it means that no exchange takes place unless both parties benefit. In other words, when there's trade, both the buyer and the seller are better off. That's why they choose to trade. Put another way, voluntary trade leads to winners and not losers. So here is a complete definition of trade that we're going to use throughout this course. Trade is voluntary exchange between two or more people for money, for other goods, or for satisfaction, that makes all participants better off. Now, this might sound a bit like a magic pudding. Trade makes everyone better off? How can that be? Well, in the next video we're going to start exploring how we can have situations where trade makes everyone better off. And that's going to tell us why people trade.